Hi, welcome back to the Loft project. This one's going to be all about fitting the insulation. If you haven't seen our video that I made maybe 2 years ago on how to fit insulation boards, I'll put a link to that below because it's quite a handy way of just showing how we went about cutting and fitting the insulation nice and snug in between all of our rafters and the stud work. I will recap that a little bit in this video because some of the footage that I've got from back then shows a little bit of that anyway. So the whole thinking behind the insulation for the project is between and below rafters. There's other ways of doing things. You could create a warm roof, which is when you insulate over the top of the rafters and then counter batten. But because this is kind of, we're working on the inside, we haven't got scaffolding up, we haven't re-roofed yet, which needs to happen, but not yet. We're trying to do everything on the inside. That meant bringing out the rafters, like you saw in the last video, so to make them slightly deeper, and then we went about insulating. So we ordered our insulation in the form of rigid sheet insulation, and this is the foil faced version. I can't remember how many we picked up at the time, but it was well over what we needed in 100mm, maybe 25 sheets, and then maybe 20 or so of the 50mm. So between those two, hopefully we had enough to do the whole of the loft project, and also out on the eaves we ended up with enough of the 100mm to do a nice insulated deck to insulate the ceilings of below. So I've got plenty of footage of all this going in, so I'll show you that now, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail of why we came up, or why we went with this system. So with all the rafters now battened out to give the extra depth for the insulation, we can start cutting and fitting all the 100mm boards. So measuring top and bottom, as there's a bit of variation in our rafters, and then cutting them nice and square. And I really wanted a tight friction fit here, so I'm just sliding a saw down the side there, getting them nice and snug, and they'll hold in themselves, and we just want to make sure they don't go up beyond the rafters. So now we're actually a couple of years later. We put the project on hold, so we're now trying to piece together what we hadn't finished and also what insulation we had fitted that then dropped out over the 2 summers where timbers had moved. So we're trying to match up, based on old photos that we've taken and some old video footage, which ones go where, because we didn't really want to cut and fit more and end up with wastage. So we managed to match most up, and then we were able to cut the remaining boards that were still missing. So we've also got 100mm of insulation between the studs at the bottom of the sloped ceiling, and the whole of this will be lined with 50mm of insulation underneath. And I'm just doing this wall now, so I'm going to put the 50mm between these studs. So what I'm going to do is just put a batten on the back of them all the way along, so that our insulation can sit against it and it won't fall out the other side. So I'll do that now, and then hopefully we'll be pretty much there with this room. Then there was a little bit of insulation to put around the hatches we cut into the loft space before we could get on with the rest of the insulation. So at this point we decided we really needed a good tidy up. There was so much dust, offcuts, and also furniture that was still in the room that we were working around. It was just a good chance to get all of that out and then basically work out what insulation we had left to make sure we could cut in the most efficient ways so that we didn't run out. So when putting the 50mm of insulation over the studs, I wanted to make sure I could get right up to the stonework, so I chipped it away here, and at this point we didn't realise we were going to strip all the plaster. So I cut a little channel and then I could slot the insulation into that. Like I said, this is around the hatch, So we will line out that and make a nice lined doorway, and then build an insulated door to fit into it. And these are all being fitted up with 75mm drywall screws and little thin washers, which pull in nicely and clamp it to the timbers. I'm just putting up a final batten here on the end wall, or the middle wall of the house, so that we've got something to fix to, especially when we come to use the plasterboard. So the way I started was to do the strip at the top of the ridge first, and then I could work down from there. And anywhere that there was a junction between two boards on two different angles, I sprayed a bead of expanding foam in, and then put the next board in just to seal up any slight cavity that would be left. So this part of the insulation is so much quicker than cutting between rafters. It's pretty much full sheets minus a little bit of trimming to fit our old sort of centres. So cutting them to length, and we can get pretty much 4 boards on each side of the roof. You can see I've prepped up there with the screws and the washers. I just stick them in a bit of insulation so they're ready to grab. If you're working with 2 people, it's obviously going to be much easier, but I was trying to do things one-handed. So when you've got the foil face like this, that acts as our vapour barrier, but you've got the joins in between the boards. Now we're going to tape that with the foil tape, which makes it continuous. The nice thing about using this stuff rather than insulated plasterboard is that the joins between each plasterboard, each sheet of plasterboard or drywall, don't carry on through the first layer of insulation. I.e., if we've got 50mm of insulation bonded to plasterboard, every time there's a join, that join goes right through to where the rafter is, so where a cold rafter might be. Whereas if you do it this way, we're going to either screw and fix our plasterboard onto here, or you could use an adhesive on a vertical surface, or you can actually run battens down, so like counter battens on the inside of here, and then fix your boards to that. That gives you, a nice little cavity there, which is on the warm side. But that cavity, you can run all your services in there, all your cabling, and you haven't got to bring it through the insulation and puncture through your vapour barrier. What we've decided to do, like I said, is just to tape up all these, and we'll fix our plasterboard over the top of the insulation, which it works out cheaper than using the insulated plasterboard. And then on the walls we're going to batten down so we can run our cabling through. You see here where we've left the new aperture for the Velux windows, and they're going to be quite a lot bigger than the old NAF kind of acrylic perspex ones we got there. So looking forward to getting those in. And the other one is out here. And there's a little bit of change of thought here. So we decided we're actually going to take down this wall now. Dad and I have been kind of umming and ahhing and thinking what's the best way to approach it. This wall here, we were going to have storage behind it, just cold loft storage. We decided now that we're going to take down the studs, take out that insulation, and continue it out into the eaves by maybe another 1200mm, so quite far into the eaves, which gives us a really deep insulated cupboard with the same temperature as the room rather than having a loft. So all of the office stuff can be right up under there with some integrated storage and drawers and shelves and stuff. So bit more work, but I think that's going to be a nice little sort of added bonus to this room and increase the size by quite a lot. I've also removed the stud over here. We're going to have a hatch, a little insulated hatch there going into that loft space. Here's a quick look at the fixings we're using for the insulation. Now obviously this changes depending on how thick your insulation is. As we're using 50mm insulation over the top, we are using 70 or 75mm screws, drywall screws. But the washers you see me using are these little flat plate or discs. You can find them pretty cheap on eBay, and they're quite often used for the tile backer board. and you simply just put your screw through it ready, and then you push it straight in and screw it through. That gives us a good 25mm 1 inch into the timber, which is perfectly adequate for holding those up. We'll then go over again with some longer screws when we fix up the plasterboard. Another way to do it would be to use the counter battens, and they would kind of replace the need for this metal washer. So you'd put those running over each rafter to clamp it up. This is what they look like when they're in. They really do pull it in. You have to make sure you don't over tighten it to damage the foil, but it's pretty hard to do. They kind of pull in nice and tight, and that gives a really solid finish. We can then tape up any holes and the gaps, or not gaps, but the joints between the boards, and then we'll fix our plasterboard over here. So that's about 95% of the insulation done. There's a little bit to finish on the landing, but the next job will be to get the storage and the little doorways into the loft all finished, and then get on to fitting some Velux windows. So please like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you next time.